Hello, I'm Jenny Brinkworth, Director of Communications from the Adelaide Archdiocese and Editor of the Southern Cross. And I'm here tonight for our the first of our media briefings for the final assembly of the 5th Plenary Council of Australia. So first up, I'll welcome our three panellists who've kindly donated their time in this cold, wintry weather. We've got Bishop Shane McKinlay, Gemma Thompson and Brother Gerard Brady. Bishop Shane is the Bishop of Sandhurst and the Vice President of the 5th Plenary Council of Australia. He was serving as Master of the Catholic Theological College when Pope Francis appointed him Bishop of Sandhurst. Gemma is a member from the Archdiocese of Perth. She is a Iona Presentation College's Dean of Mission and Catholic Identity, a member of Perth Archdiocese Vocations Committee, and a member of the Archdiocese Centre for Faith Enrichment Committee of Management. That's a mouthful. Brother Gerard is the province leader of the Christian Brothers in Oceania. He currently lives in Melbourne and works closely with his team and lay advisors. He is one of the leaders of religious institutes who are members of the Plenary Council. So before we throw some questions to the floor, we thought we might just get you to each give us a little bit of an overview of the first 24 hours of the Plenary Council and share some thoughts with us. So perhaps if we start with you, Bishop Shane.
Thanks, Jenny. So I'd probably pick three things as highlights. The Mass last night at Mary MacKillop Place around the tomb of Mary MacKillop was a wonderful way to begin, and there was a great sense of excitement that we were gathering in person. And to gather in a space where we were all quite close, all masked, obviously, all those things we're so used to now, but we're able to be quite close and to enjoy dinner afterwards. After 4 years of preparation, after the first assembly being delayed by a year because of COVID and then going ahead online, to actually be gathering with people, and a lot of people for me, and I think for others, who I had got to meet and to speak with online, but had never actually seen in the flesh. So there was this real sense of excitement after so much build-up. That'd be a really positive and spirit-filled way to begin. Second one, I think, would be the there were three amendments that were presented today arising from the spiritual conversations before lunch, and one of them related to actually no, it wasn't an amendment. It was related to a motion that was already there about the introducing in an appropriate, liturgically and culturally appropriate way, elements from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture to accompany and complement our liturgies. And two Aboriginal women spoke about what some of that ritual and spiritual heritage was for them, that they would see us as drawing on in that. And that was really powerful testimony and quite revealing, I think, for a lot of us to be invited into some of that space. And then the third thing was in our final session today, which was dealing with the awful harm and trauma that's been brought about by abuse by people in the church of children, especially others as well, but particularly of children, and mindful of how significant this was and how important that we give it really serious weight, we decided to set it in a context, in a liturgical context, a prayerful context. So our discussion and discernment and voting on the motions was set in a lament. So there was an extended and quite beautiful ritual that we began with, and then we had discussion interspersed with other periods of prayer before voting, and then a longer period again at the end. And all that will be, the ritual part of that certainly will be available by about midweek, we think, on the website, so that other people can share in that. But it was both a very moving experience and carried the weight that it needed to, but it's also, I think, a good model of of how this sort of thing can be done well when a community wishes to engage in. There's a variety of memorials, and one of the sorts of memorials that can help to mark the significance of this trauma and of the ongoing care and duty we owe to those who've been hurt is in the way that we celebrate rituals. So it was very good on that point too.
Thank you. I share very much what Bishop Shane has shared with us, and I think one of the things that was really evident for me was coming together. There was a beautiful energy and a beautiful buzz amongst all of the members, and I think it was so wonderful to gather again, or for the first time for many of us, in person, and it was like seeing old friends and new friends, and I guess the great sense of inclusion of all members, so people saying hello in corridors and people smiling, and there was a wonderful sense of community, and that concept of synodality, in the sense of walking together, journeying together, was very much evident in the room today, both last night at Mass, again at Mass this evening. So I think for me that's been a real highlight. I also think the people here are representing everyone in Australia are very much taking the privilege of being here as a serious responsibility, and people have come here with much prayer, much discernment, having listened to the voices of those in their home diocese. And it's wonderful to see that they're not just here for the journey of the assemblies, they're here for the future church in Australia. And there's a great sense of commitment. And what Archbishop Tim said today about being a journey of pilgrim people, we are here for the long haul in terms of we believe in the church, we love the church, and we want to see it move forward with the new renewal and reform that it needs.
Thank you. There's nothing more for me to add, I don't think. They've stolen my thunder. No, I was thinking about the relationality that's part and parcel of this whole experience. And it was there in the first plenary too, but in a very different way. Now we're meeting people off screen, and I think it's the informal things that strike me very much. The chats that we have at morning tea or lunch, the connection with people around our table, and the sincerity of the group that's gathered. There's a deep sincerity and commitment of everyone at this plenary. I suppose what's touched my heart a lot in this 24 hours is the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander presence. That it's been very significant and very powerful, and it's been held by women, which I find quite extraordinary. It's the women who hold the message of the faith and really bring that alive and have a deep passion for their commitment to their communities that they come from. I'm struck with maybe this is, the disconnect. We somehow still are struggling to integrate an Aboriginal spirituality into a Catholic spirituality. I think there's a struggle there, and we're trying to find ways of what are the doorways in and what are the expressions. And I see great potential in interculturality, of deeper studies and understanding of cross-cultural ways of deepening the symbol and the meaning that Aboriginal people have in their own culture that's sacramental, and that we can then learn from and discover from. So that's one highlight. And tonight, just being moved by the experience of being invited into the Ukrainian church, and its powerful message of asking forgiveness and mercy, which I think has been a theme this afternoon. It was very powerful. I would have picked up too today the deep theme of trauma, the trauma of Aboriginal people being separated from their culture and their land, and those who have been abused by us in the church of being separated and in pain.
Thank you. That was wonderful. I think they were wonderful insights. So over to who would like to go first with a question?
I'm happy to, because it might pick up nicely on where we just left off. I'll put this question to all three of you, I suppose.
Sure.
I understand that one of the amendments that was made to the set of motions on the Church's response to child sexual abuse, one of the amendments was that the ACBC, Catholic Religious Australia, and the Association of Ministerial PJPs will conduct their own review and assessment of the systemic factors that led to child abuse within the Catholic Church. Given that case study 50 in the Royal Commission already trod over that ground, I'm just wondering if you might speak to what a church-run review might add to the existing knowledge base, and who might be involved and what kind of factors led to that decision being made.
So, with so many of the things in this plenary council, we're very aware we're not starting from scratch. But we're also very aware that that doesn't mean that we do nothing, that we don't take the next step. This is not the first word in the church in Australia, and it's not the last word. And that's certainly true in this domain. I'm not sure what gave rise to the thinking of the table that proposed that amendment, but certainly it was. It seemed to us in the drafting committee that it had good merit to be considered, to be put to the Assembly. It was introducing something that genuinely strengthened and complemented the motion that was there, and it was strongly welcomed by the Assembly more broadly, as picking up that we need to be addressing, because the other parts of that motion focused on different ways of working towards justice, justice, healing, addressing the trauma for those who've been directly affected, those who've been indirectly affected. But this was a good way, I think, and welcomed as a way of recognising that we also need to look at the broader picture of how this happened in the church, drawing clearly on the very valuable work of the Royal Commission, but making sure that we do draw on that, and then picking that up and taking that further. And obviously, some of the things about the broader picture of the church tap into other parts of the material that we'll be considering during this week also. In terms of who might be involved, that as this has only arisen today, obviously no one's done any work on it yet, but one of the obvious groups to draw on, apart from the work that was done in the Royal Commission, is there's a unit in Australian Catholic University that's done some extensive work on child protection and the situation in institutions, particularly in the church, around safeguarding and failures in safeguarding.
Thank you very much.
I might just add something. What strikes me about this area is that the more research we can engage in, the more we keep learning. And I'm really pleased to hear what you've said, Shane, about Australian Catholic University. The church cannot critique herself. The church has to have groups from outside who are trained, who are academically attuned to asking the right questions, so that that research can depth and take us to another stage. I know back in the 90s, our brothers invited one of our guys who was highly trained in research to do a study of what were the causal factors that caused abuse in our system, and it proved to be very, very helpful for us. Sadly, that study was put under interdict for quite a few years because it was too truthful, I think. And that's what we need. We need studies that are going to expose what are the deep causal factors that are creating and have created, and if they're not addressed, will continue to create closed systems that I think is one of the major problems that we're dealing with.
Mark, have you got something?
Yeah, Mark Bowling from the Catholic Leader, Brisbane-based, global reach.
And the tablet.
Yes, true. Look, Bishop Shane, you mentioned 3 points, and you talked about going backwards, a memorial model that could be of significance in addressing trauma. Can you expand on that one? And then also the second point where you were talking about liturgical elements that would be brought in. Now it's interesting, that one particularly, because after running a story overnight about the smoking ceremony and so forth, the comments went wild on social media, both for and against. All aspects of the spectrum, you could say. I'm just wondering how, and this is probably for all of you to perhaps answer, to express how long is it going to take? How long does change of this nature take in the church? Rank and file, top to bottom, all the rest of it, because, so that lots of questions on this side.
Sure. Remind me, the first one again was
about the memorial.
trauma.
Yeah.
So there was already in one of the motions a recognition that in a variety of places across Australia there are already physical memorials of different kinds, and there was an encouragement to other places to consider the appropriateness of memorials which might be physical. So it wasn't specifying that they had to be physical, recognising that there could be other ways. There are other ways that we, in our actions, for instance, that we remember things, that we remember significant things. And that complements the other motion there around what's currently called Safeguarding Sunday, but which is seeking not only to highlight our awareness of the what each community needs to do to be faithful to its commitment to ensure that safeguarding is embedded and that everyone both is and feels safe in involvement with the church, but also to acknowledge the harm that's been done when that trust has been breached, and to work towards healing for that. So the name of that day and the liturgical materials that have gone to parishes each year around that have been focused very much on safeguarding, which doesn't pick up the broader aims that are already there in what we say we would like Safeguarding Sunday to be doing. So we'd be hoping that one of the things arising from this consideration is both a new name, but also a broader focus in the liturgical materials that are available to parishes when they do that annual commemoration. In terms of the Aboriginal things, it's probably really important to distinguish two different kinds of thing. One is the if you like, the purely Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander rituals, such as a smoking ceremony or things like welcome to country. When we make space for those, it's always prior to a liturgy commencing, and that was very clear again last night and this morning. So where it's an Aboriginal ritual as such, we do that prior to and outside the liturgy, and as part of our preparation for celebrating liturgically. They're obviously related to one another, but it's not suggesting that this becomes part of the liturgy. What's proposed in the motion is a different thing from that. It's around looking at what elements might we introduce, and elements of this have happened already in some liturgies in parts of Australia and in similar situations in other parts of the world. How might we, for instance, celebrate the penitential rite, drawing on Aboriginal spirituality, and that's work clearly that's to be done rather than concrete proposals that are being made at this stage. There's an Aboriginal Our Father that was approved years ago for use in Australia, and so that's why that motion is in terms of implementation, directed first of all to the Bishops' Commission for Liturgy to draw on the appropriate resources in consultation with NATSIC and drawing on other liturgical expertise to develop theologically, liturgically, culturally appropriate ways, because there's ways you can go wrong in any one of those. Just grab something like you go into the souvenir shop and grab something that looks Aboriginal and drop it in, and it's not being respectful of culture any more than it's being respectful of the liturgy. So it's a very delicate thing, and is something that we're confident the Bishops' Commission for Liturgy, in collaboration with NATSIC, the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Catholic Council, would be best placed to lead.
Anyone else on that issue? Yep.
I'd just like to pick up on the ritual that Shane referred to. My sense of good liturgy is it taps into people's lived experience, and when there's good liturgy, there's a sense of people being drawn into the experience, and I felt that very much today with the ritual that was done around reconciliation and acknowledging the hurt, the damage and the harm that has been inflicted on people who have been victims in our system. So one of the areas that was discussed, say, at our table was how do we engage with people in the community to put those rituals together so that they're, one, sensitive and respectful, because to do anything like that, say, in a wider parish community, there needs to be very clear cognizance of people who have been damaged, who will come and could be re-traumatised through something like that. So what's the sensitivity required in that, and how does a community put that together? And I suspect that's the same with the potential of Aboriginal liturgies emerging now in their communities, that maybe what happens at Daly River will be very different to what happens at Wadea or something of that description, because the symbols, what's going on in that community at the time, the maybe the conflicts, the differences, it might be that the ritual has to really respond to those sorts of things in a very different way to what might be more mainstream celebrations of Eucharist.
I just keep thinking back to Erica and to Mary, who shared their experiences today, and I think the one thing that really struck me about their comments was walk with us, journey with us. And so very much drawing on the experience of bodies like NATSIC, of the Bishops' Commission, of women like Mary and Erica, who are willing to share their wisdom and their spirituality, their deep faith with all of us. And that sense of dialogue is so important to all of us.
Right, just as you were talking, Jerry, a very practical instance of drawing really well on Aboriginal spirituality is at the first assembly, each of us members of the Plenary Council were offered a wooden cross that had been made in an Aboriginal community, decorated by Aboriginal people with their symbols, and specifically for the Plenary Council. And I noticed the Bishop Columba Macbeth Green, who has a lot of involvement directly with Aboriginal people, he's turned his one into a pectoral cross, and that's the one he's wearing at the Plenary Council. I think that works. It works. Yeah.
Yes, Adrian.
Yes, Adrian from the Archdiocese of Brisbane. I might throw this one to Gemma since it was Archbishop Costello speaking. Just in the opening address today, he posed the rhetorical question. He said, who knows what will have to die for something new to spring to life? And I just wonder, do you get a sense that there's an openness to the Holy Spirit or to the process? It might be messy, but you've got faith that the Holy Spirit is somehow guiding it and something surprising might emerge.
Overall? I do, actually. And I think, having participated in the first assembly and saw what happened there, and I think I'm continually amazed reflecting back being here in person and what we were able to achieve together online was quite extraordinary. And at the start of the week, you're thinking, how is this all going to come together? And you've got a diversity of opinions, diversity of backgrounds, diversity of faith experience and lived experiences. And seeing how the Spirit moved among and in people during that week was extraordinary. And I think I have great hope that that will happen this week. And I think just seeing how things have started off and understanding there will be bumps along the road, it's not going to be a smooth journey. But as long as people are open to the Spirit, I think there's great potential for that for sure.
Does anyone else want to have a go at that question?
It's a great question. I'm glad you've picked up on it. It excites me because it's the heart and soul of the Christian story, dying and living in the possibility and the potential of something new is coming. And look, there's no doubt about it, something is dying in the Catholic Church. The attraction of getting young people to come to the Eucharist, the attraction to families, what's missing there, what's dying, what's not alive anymore in the lives of people. So that's the challenge that's being thrown to the Plenary Council, I think, to look at. Not that it's going to necessarily be full churches anymore, but what are the expressions of the Catholic ethos? I mean, it's in our education areas, it's in our social justice work, it's the ways that people can be connected to church in a very broad way, very broad spectrum. But I think something has to die. Something has to die for something new to emerge, and we have no idea what it is. I'm a religious order that's dying, and we're naming it. We are coming to completion. And it's sad, but we're not depressed. We're saying we're going out with a sense of hope, because what's the new that's going to emerge out of that? Until it can die, I don't think any new life can emerge.
Any other questions from out there?
I've got another one, yeah.
I thought you might.
Well, someone's got to ask them. So look, this morning I understand that with the introduction and the motions to pass the introductory prologue, there was a hiccup in that process where a large number of votes of, excuse my Latin, what is it?
Placet juxta modum.
Right.
And we're not talking about votes until the results are announced at 1 o'clock.
But can I ask a broader question around? Sure. So given that that motion kind of struggled a little bit, do you think this indicates either a kind of mistake, like a lack of familiarity with the standing orders or the instructions of the Plenary Council, so people just voted in a certain way that they didn't quite realise what they were doing? Or do you think it indicates a real unhappiness or a real sense that the documents do need some amending? Because I'm sure you're aware in the lead up to the council there's been a lot of consternation amongst certain groups, both on the reforming side and from some conservatives that say that the documents don't really represent the fullness of the vision on either end. So I'm just wondering, even if we can't speak about the vote itself, what sense you had of the way people are navigating that feeling of maybe dissatisfaction with the incompleteness of the documents and how that may or may not have appeared in the process.
So I certainly don't have any sense that there's broad dissatisfaction with the documents. On the contrary, so perhaps just to deal with the Placet juxta modum first, it's confusing, and when we're dealing with Latin, and because of what a plenary council is and the status that it has, there's canonical structures that we need to use, which include those terms. We've had various attempts at translating the Placet juxta modum, which is essentially something to do with, I'm not against this, but I don't think we're there yet. I'm not ready to support it in its current model, in its current formulation. One of the canon lawyers was saying later that when that was used at the Second Vatican Council, that was in fact the way that amendments were proposed. So when a bishop voted Placet juxta modum, it was assenting with this modification, and they said what the modification was that they thought should be included. Now we're obviously past that stage. We had that stage a month ago where we published the motions and invited members to suggest amendments, and we got over 600 suggestions, which has led to very extensive not rethinking of the document, but a real tightening and nuancing and clarifying and strengthening, I think. every paragraph when you look at the marked up version shows the fruit of that. So the placet juxta modum, it stays, and we and I spoke to the Assembly to clarify, because there certainly was some confusion. I heard a number of people confused, and numbers of other people heard that. I didn't hear much dissatisfaction. But I spoke to the Assembly to clarify exactly what the situation is in terms of the meaning of the votes, even though we do have an English translation, but as with any translation, it limps. And what the consequence of that, some people had a thought, I think, that that placet juxta modum meant, well, we want to rework this on the floor, which is clearly not possible in the space and time that we've got. But one of the things, and we've included it in the instruction, is that if there's a simple majority of placet juxta modum in either the consultative vote or the deliberative vote, that's referred to the steering committee to consider, because it's very different from a motion either succeeding or failing. It says, we're on the way, but there's something else needs to be done here, and that would be part of what the steering committee would then consider if we got to that point, and we're certainly nowhere near that, but if we were to get to that point, well, what is the extra work? And and that may well be the case too, if motions don't reach the 2/3. We've deliberately set a very high bar of a 2/3 majority, and there's bound to be some motions that don't reach the 2/3, and that doesn't mean that the Assembly, that the Council is rejecting them, because almost certainly there'll be significant support for any motion that goes forward. But it does say we're not at the point of mature enough reflection that we're ready to make a clear pronouncement in this space yet. As I said earlier, this is not the last thing that we'll do in the Church in Australia. So part of that is setting what the work is that we need to carry forward. Part of the work we need to carry forward.
Thank you.
You mentioned tightening up the language.
Yep.
The motion that did make mention of LGBTI, those words, which were very specific, that was extracted in the amendment. No,
it hasn't been. There is an amendment that proposes it be extracted.
Oh,
so it remains as the base motion. That's on the first one tomorrow afternoon in part 3. It remains as the base motion, but there was strong response. That was one of the things that there was strong response to in both directions. And the drafting committee thought this is not something that we should be determining. This is something that the Assembly needs to decide which language it wants to adopt. And so there's an amendment that allows for that to be changed to the language that was used in the working document that was circulated to members at the end of February. So we didn't use the specific language in that document, and because of the very strong response saying, well, if we're talking about inclusion and welcome, the first step should be the basic courtesy of addressing people as they ask to be referred to, as they identify themselves.
Right. So it was in, then it was out, then it was in again?
No.
Right.
It was not included in the working document at the end of February, and then has been included in every version of the motion since then. There is an amendment that will be considered tomorrow afternoon which would take it out. Still refers to clearly to that group, but without using that specific terminology.
Right, we're probably nearly done. I might just, to wrap it up, just ask Jared and Gemma.
You should have left your name tag.
I should have.
It's been a long day. It's been a long day. But maybe just to wrap up, what you're hoping to get out of the remainder of the plenary. We've only just started, I know, but if there's anything in particular that you really are looking for to get out of this, and what your hopes are, I guess.
I'd like to pick up on what Shane was saying, that it's a discernment process that I think is new to quite a few people. in the church. And a discernment process invites us in on a journey. You come to issues, you look at them. Some are too difficult to handle at the time, but they keep staying there. They're not going to go away from us, and we've got to come back and revisit. So that'd be my hope. I would have some hopes around governance in the church. I believe the church is at a point now of maturity where it can share its governance very equally with lay people and with those who are called to the ministry of leadership in the church. And I think the church is deprived of that gift currently in quite a few areas. So that'd be one of my hopes. I think the whole area that Shane's been referring to about inclusivity, I think it's a big area that we've got to look at, not just in sexuality, but across the range of a whole areas there of different cultures, enculturation of the church in those areas to become respectful, welcoming, and seeing, picking up the lovely reading tonight, there are many gifts in the church, and each group brings a richness in their diversity. And I think if we come out of the plenary with that, I'll be quite satisfied.
Thank you. I think the phrase that comes to me is that letting go to let come, and listening to the quote about the dying for the new to emerge. And there is, I guess, a great courage that needs to come with the let go to let come. But one of the things Archbishop Costello spoke about this morning was that sense of listening and hearing. And I think that deep listening that will continue to occur over the next week is important, but it needn't stop there. It needs to continue on as we journey forward together. And I think too, accepting, as Brother Jared has said, that it is a journey, that we're not going to solve everything in 1 week, but there has been definitely some key issues that have been discussed and discerned and prayed about and thought about, many of which obviously that are reflected in the motions, but there's things that are going to take time. And I think one of the questions referred to earlier in terms of how long will things take, and that's a really challenging question to answer because some will be quicker than others, but I think the important thing is that they're done with a great sense of inclusion, a great sense of acceptance, a great sense of authenticity, and listening to the people that have the wisdom, and going back very much to what was said at the very first plenary mass, is making sure that we're a Christ-centred church, reaching out to those on the margins. I guess that would be my hope, is for an inclusive church where we can all cohesively come together, where God's church is big enough for everybody.
Thank you.
I think that's a good way to end,
Yes.
and thank you very much. You've set a very high benchmark, I think, for our other panellists. We've got them every night this week, but that's just a brilliant start, and thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Jenny.
Good to be
Thanks,
with you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming along.
Good.